Well, you guys staying cool these days? Getting warm outside. Hope your air conditioning working. Get jumping in the pool maybe a little bit. We are in the middle of a big series this summer on developing spiritual habits. And really we're just looking at some practices that the church has had for centuries about how to develop a faith that is robust and strong and growing. And Jesus really talks about that process kind of like farming. Spiritual growth doesn't just happen naturally. It's got to be cultivated. You got to have some intentionality into investing in your spiritual life so that it can grow and it can flourish. And so that's what we've been talking about the last few weeks. Want to start out this morning by showing you a few pictures of the two different kinds of people in this world. And if you Google two different kinds of people, you'll see some really fun images. And so I'm going to ask you to kind of raise your hand if you're one of these people. And if you're sitting next to somebody who is one of these people, but they're not raising your hand, just go ahead and kind of point at them so that we know that we want to make sure people are honest and authentic here. And a lot of times the two different kinds of people end up living in the exact same household, which makes things extra fun, right? So here's the first one, okay? Easy one. Toilet paper. From the front or from the back, right? Nothing more petty than starting an argument early in your marriage about which way the toilet paper. Okay, how many off the front? How many people say toilet paper should always go off the front? Okay, how many off the back? Okay, you back people are outnumbered. All right. Okay, next one. The notifications on your phone. Some of you see that little red circle, and there's nothing inside of you that can prevent you from going to eliminate that by checking your email, your notification. Others of you, how many of you actually have probably like 15,000 unread emails? And you're like, yeah, that's what I got, you know? How many of you guys are the I cannot leave a notification unchecked people? Yeah, okay. So kind of even there. And does it just drive you nuts, you people in the second category, when you pick up your wife's phone or your husband's phone and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even do this, right? Okay, next one. The toothpaste. Now, I showed somebody this picture and they're like, who grabs the toothpaste from the middle or the front? And if you're a parent of a middle schooler, you know that as illogical as that seems, that happens, and some people just never outgrow that, right? So how many of you guys actually grab it from the middle and are willing to admit that? Okay, like 3, 4, oh, more, okay. Oh, I see a few people pointing, that's good. And then how many people are like, hey, there's a way, you fold it, it's nice and neat, yeah. All right, one more, last one. And this is really a deal breaker, right? So some of you at the halfway mark on the gas tank are like, hey, we gotta pull over, like we're getting low, right? And some of you know that when that little light engine gas fuel light low button comes on, you still got some time, and was that on Tuesday that it came on or Thursday? We're living by faith, not by sight, and it'll be fine, and you're stressing the rest of us out. So how many of you are like half a tank or quarter of a tank, you're pulling over, you're prepared in case there's an emergency? Okay, how many of you guys are like, the fuel light's mostly always on? Yeah, there's two kinds of people in the world, right? And that says a lot. I want to look this morning at the Gospel of Matthew, and in chapter 7, Jesus is wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount. It's really a summary of the main tenets of Christianity and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And the end of the sermon, as Jesus kind of wraps up, he basically says there's two kinds of people on the earth. And as Jesus explains, he says one kind is going to enter the kingdom of heaven, and one kind is going to be separated from his presence. And the difficult thing about this passage is that both kinds of people actually look like they are living pretty moral, ethical, good lives. And so I want us to think a little bit about our obedience today, how it is that we submit our lives to Jesus and to God's authority and what he commands and asks for us to do. Because Jesus actually spends a significant amount of time distinguishing between true obedience and that leads to life and false obedience that leads to death. And so turn to the Gospel of Matthew with me if you have a Bible or a phone, and we'll mostly be in chapter 7. You can eliminate all those notifications if you're one of those people as you go there. But I want to pray for us this morning before we read, but want to actually pray the Lord's Prayer, which is found in Matthew 6, right before, during the Sermon on the Mount. So let me just lead us in the Lord's Prayer as we begin this morning. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we also forgive those who have trespassed against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, Matthew chapter 7. I'm going to start in verse 21 today. It says this. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.' Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." And when Jesus had finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. So this is how Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most famous speeches and well-known speeches given in human history. He says there's two kinds of people. And he starts out in verse 21 talking about the kingdom of heaven, and we could spend a ton of time kind of unpacking what that phrase means and how Matthew uses it, but let's just in simple terms say that Jesus is talking about the people of God living under the rule of God. And we enter into the kingdom of heaven when we place our faith in Jesus and trust him for our salvation. The kingdom of heaven includes the afterlife, which is kind of where we usually go immediately, but it really starts now. That's not how Matthew's original readers would have thought about the kingdom of heaven originally, as an after-death experience, but really a kind of quality of life that goes for eternity but starts and is experienced now and here on the earth. And so I want to talk this morning about a couple things, about the way out of the kingdom, that is, the people who Jesus says miss the whole point and don't enter into the kingdom of heaven. And then I want to talk about the way into the kingdom, the kind of true obedience that leads to eternal life and a security that we can find in Jesus. And then I want to give us a couple practical ideas at the end about how we can live out and build a foundation of obedience in following after Jesus. So the way out, the way in, and then a few practical ideas. So first, the way out. It's much more common today to emphasize and think about Jesus, how Jesus loves and accepts everyone, and we don't like to talk about the idea of a judgment, that Jesus judges. Yet at the Bible, in Scripture, Scripture holds those two things as simultaneously true, that Jesus both loves his creation, but that he also promises to bring justice and to judge the rebellion and evil acts of human beings. And at the end of this sermon, Jesus said, and not everybody gets in. Not everybody chooses, not everybody is chosen, however you think about that. Not everybody gets into the kingdom of heaven. And we typically think about those people maybe as atheists and criminals, but Jesus isn't actually talking about those people in this passage. He says in verse 21, he says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, the word Lord is just the Greek translation of the Old Testament name for God, Yahweh. And so saying Lord, Lord, or saying that, repeating that word, that title, is really just a way to express passionate devotion or intense emotion. So these are people who are passionate about Jesus, who say Lord, Lord. They're probably going to church. They probably got their radio station tuned to K-Love. They are maybe generous and tithing. They're maybe involved in a Bible study. They do good things, but Jesus says, not everyone who is passionate about me will enter the kingdom of heaven. And then in verse 22, he says, on that day, many will say to me. What day is he talking about? He's talking about Judgment Day. And this phrase, or Jesus saying this, is actually one of the reasons why the Pharisees and the religious leaders were so angry. Because he says, on that day, on Judgment Day, many will say to me. Jesus is saying, when that day happens, and it will happen, I will be the one sitting on the judgment seat. People will be coming to me to be judged. And so he's putting himself into the place of God. He says, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? Now, if you've been a Christian for a long time, you may remember door knocking. This was kind of an evangelistic technique where you would just kind of go out into your neighborhood or a different neighborhood and you would knock on people's door and you would attempt to share the gospel with them. Doesn't happen a whole lot anymore, but that's how many people would share their faith with strangers. And one of the questions that people would ask when they knocked on your door is, hey, if you were to die and you were to be in front of the judgment seat of Jesus, and he said to you, why should I let you in to my heaven? What would you say? That was kind of the intro question that you would use to get people thinking about, okay, what would I say and what would my salvation be based on? And for many people, even people who would claim to be Christian, their response would be some form of, well, you know, I'm a pretty decent person. I haven't killed anybody. I'm nice most of the time. I give away my money. I try not to hurt people. You know, they were appealing to their record, their list of works or of good things. And if you see what they're doing, what they're saying is, when I stand before Jesus, my best chance of getting into heaven is to tell Jesus about as many of the good things that I did that I can remember. And this is the same thing as the people in this passage are doing. They're at the judgment, Jesus says, and they're like, Jesus, look at all of the good things that we did for you. And if your response, if you are trying to answer that question to yourself, and your response to that is that when I get to the judgment seat, I would try to list off as many good things as I can do. Look at all the great things that I've done for you, Jesus. Jesus says, you've missed the main point of the gospel. That's not how it works. You're never able to do enough to earn your way into the kingdom of heaven. And here's Jesus' response to them, right? He says, I never knew you. There wasn't a relational connection there. They were doing things. He says, I never knew you. Depart from me. And this is really the ultimate demise of human beings, that God would remove his presence from them. Separation from God. And so somehow, even though these people have been obedient, they've done lots of great things, their outward actions have been good in moral terms, they've been passionate about Jesus. When it comes to the final judgment, Jesus says, I don't know you. They've missed it. So how can this happen? Right? How is this possible? And Jesus tells us in this next section, and it's all about the foundation that we build our lives on. So first we learn the way out, right? That not everyone who is passionate about Jesus is going to get into the kingdom of heaven, that there will be a judgment, and that your works, the list of all the great things that you have done, are not going to be the thing that Jesus is going to look at when you are there. And so, these things should cause us to do a little bit of self-reflection, right? To say, if I stood before Jesus, what would I say? What would be my response? What would I appeal to? If my good works won't get me in, what will? Is there a way I can know for sure and have a confidence, not only in my eternal destiny, but a confidence to face the challenges that life gives me? And the answer is yes, that there is a foundation that you can build your life on that can weather not only any earthly storm, but also the same foundation that gives you that confidence. So the way in, how do we enter the kingdom of heaven? Now, if you went to Sunday school as a kid, this story of the wise and the foolish builder, do you remember the song? Maybe that you'd have to be over like 40, I don't know, 35, right? It says, I tried to get Sammy and the guys to sing this morning. They refused. But it says, the wise man built his house upon the rock, right? You repeat that. And it says that the rains came tumbling down. The rains came down, the floods came up. You remember this? The rains came down. Yeah. And so you repeat that, and then it says the house on the rock, what? Stood firm, right? Or stood fast. It was there. And then you switched it, and you're like, the foolish man, built his house upon the sand. And the rains came down, and the floods came up. And then we used to say, the house on the sand went smash or splat or whatever. And it was really fun as we talked about the eternal destiny of the foolish man. Right? I'm not sure if our Sunday school teacher really, talked about that part, but it was really fun to just smash your hand. But in my mind, when my Sunday school teacher would kind of present that story and we would sing about it, and she'd bring out the flannel graph. If you don't know what that is, it's great analog technology that just sticks with you. But in my mind, the house on the rock always looked a little bit nicer. If you remember this, like the house on the rock was like an upper middle class dwelling. It was built solidly. And then when she put the house on the sand up there, it was kind of like this little shack that was maybe cobbled together with some spare parts and some scrap lumber and stuff. But in actuality, the point of this story is that the two houses look the same on the outside. There's not one that's better than the other from the appearance of it. It's what's underneath. It's the foundation that makes these houses different, not the outside. And Jesus is going back to this idea that there are two kinds of people. There's two foundations to build your life on. Your works, which is what most of us naturally appeal to, that Jesus would accept us based on our works, and then faith. And Jesus says one's going to last and one's going to be destroyed. But you rarely see the foundation of a house, right? Typically you just see what's above the ground. And if you were to read all of chapter 7, you would notice that this is actually the third example that Jesus gives of two kinds of things. And so skim back with me real quick. In chapter 7, in verse 13, he says there are two gates and two paths. One that leads to life and one that leads to destruction. And then a little bit later down in 15 and 16, he says there's two kinds of trees. There's one with good fruit and one with bad fruit. And then now there are two houses, two foundations, and both houses look the same on the outside, but one of them can withstand a hurricane and a flood, and the other is ultimately destroyed. And so what Jesus is saying is that there's two spiritual approaches to building your life, and they're hard to tell apart, but they are fundamentally different. If you read the news this week, you knew that there was a tragic building collapse in Florida. And if you looked at that building, there are a number of apartment buildings around that area. They all look pretty much the same. But a few years ago, an inspector noticed there was some cracking, and he actually said that there was some waterproofing that had failed around the pool, and that water was leaking into kind of the structural concrete, and that was going to be a problem. And so most of us, we wouldn't know or ever see the structural piece of that building, but it was cracking and crumbling and ultimately led to a devastating collapse when on the outside it looked completely like all the other buildings. And so to really understand what Jesus is trying to say in this passage, we have to go back earlier in the sermon to Matthew 5 and 6. And Jesus is not contrasting good people and bad people for the most part in this sermon. He is most often pointing out the obedience of the Pharisees, the religious leaders, and saying, don't be like that. And so the Pharisees prayed, but Jesus says, don't pray like them, pray like this. The Pharisees gave their money to the poor, but Jesus says, don't give to the poor like that. Give to the poor like this. The Pharisees fasted, and Jesus says, don't fast like that, fast like this. They're good actions, but Jesus says, don't do it like that. And so, quickly, here's kind of the two foundations that I think Jesus is alluding to. The first, what false obedience is really what the Pharisees were doing. We'll call that religion. And religion says, I obey, therefore I am accepted. That my obedience is what earns my approval and acceptance before God. And so many people, as they do good things, their motivation is actually very selfish. That the reason they are doing good things is so that God will hopefully give them the life that they want. It's a way to try to manipulate God into serving whatever desires that you have. And then the second way, which I think Jesus describes as true obedience, which we'll call Christianity, is just the opposite, is that I am accepted, therefore I obey. That your acceptance before God is based totally on what Jesus has done for you, not on what you have done for Jesus. It's not based on your obedience, it's based on His obedience. And when you place your faith in Him and realize that it's only by the grace of God that He has opened your eyes to understand the beauty and the truth of the gospel, your response is love and gratitude and obedience. When you have that as your foundation, your obedience is not an obligation, it's a joy. And this is what 1 John 5:3 says, "For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome." Does your obedience to Jesus feel like a burden? Does your obedience feel like an obligation? And I think if it does, it's probably for one of two reasons. It could be that you have believed in religion, that you have been trying to earn your salvation and your acceptance before God, and so that means the rest of your life it will always be kind of this question, did I do enough? Did I do enough to make it? And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. The other way is that it could be that love is the missing component, that you've never actually experienced the life-transforming love of Jesus. You've just been doing good things because that's what you were told you were supposed to do. Let me just illustrate the difference here real quick. Have you ever known somebody who's maybe in an unhealthy relationship, and maybe a birthday or an anniversary came along, and we'll just pick on the guys here for a second, and just imagine with me that the guy says, "Oh, it's my anniversary again. I gotta get flowers or a present. It's gonna have to take off from work early, and oh gosh, flowers are not cheap these days." That's his response. Like, if you know somebody who feels like giving gifts to their girlfriend, wife is a chore, an obligation, like that's a pretty clear sign of an unhealthy relationship, right? That's easy to spot. Even us guys can spot that. Like, easy. Now contrast that with a high school boy who has a girlfriend. Okay, and I've had some of these boys in my youth groups over the years, and this is great, right? They have a girlfriend, and they're not just in love. They are like totally Twitter-pated, right? And so you're like, "Hey, Valentine's Day is coming up. Did you get your girlfriend anything?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I got her the teddy bear, got her the chocolate. I got flowers coming to the house in the morning. Then I'm bringing more flowers in the afternoon. We're going out to eat in a limo. You know, like he's just, and you're like, this costs a lot of money, right? He doesn't care, right? Because even if you're like, dude, this relationship's probably not going to last that long. Maybe you should like dial it back a little bit. Doesn't matter, right? It is a joy to buy and to purchase all of those things because he is totally in love. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is talking about the connection between obedience and love. And here's what he says. He says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. And then he says, these things I've spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. If your obedience is an attempt to earn God's approval or try to manipulate God into giving you the life that you want, it will be an incredible burden to try to live up to that. But if your obedience is an expression of your love for Jesus, it will bring you great joy. And the best movie example I could think of about this concept is Princess Bride, obviously. At the very beginning of this movie, there is Princess Buttercup, right? And Princess Buttercup lives on this very picturesque kind of farm, and they have a hired hand named Wesley. And Wesley's there to do the chores, and Princess Buttercup, let's be honest, kind of a jerk in the beginning, right? She's like ordering Wesley around, like, hey, fill that water, polish the saddle, clean the stables, right? And so she's kind of bossy and just kind of treating him like dirt. But what does Wesley say every time? You remember? As you wish, right? He looks her right in the eye. He says, as you wish. And over time, Princess Buttercup realizes that Wesley's obedience is actually a demonstration of his love for her. That when he is doing what she says and doing it with a good attitude, it's a joy to serve the one he loves. And she finally comes around, gets that, right? But Wesley's saying, as you wish, is this picture of as we receive the commands and ways of Jesus, that we would say to Jesus, Jesus, you want me to live like that? Absolutely. It would be my joy to live in the way that you've asked me to live because of all you've done for me, the way that I've experienced your love. This is just an easy response of my love back to you. 1 Corinthians 13, the first couple verses, says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I'm nothing. Right? Love is the difference. Obedience done out of love is what Jesus is looking for. It's the foundation that's built on the rock. So what's your foundation this morning? What brings your life ultimate meaning and purpose? Many of us Christians, it's very easy to say that Jesus is my Lord, Jesus is my foundation, and then to live like our career or our family or success or whatever it is that you're chasing after is actually the foundation. And so the way into the kingdom of heaven is building our lives with the foundation of the gospel, that our obedience is not done out of obligation, but out of the love and gratitude for what Jesus has already done for us. And so let me just give us a few thoughts on what this looks like practically. And here's the thing when it comes to obedience. Most of us know what we should be doing that we're not doing. And most of us know what we should not be doing that we are doing. Like, we could probably make that list fairly easily in our lives. And so I'm not going to go around and say this is the specific things you should do. These are just some general principles and ideas for, if you want to take a step forward in your obedience to Jesus, here's what that might look like. First, start small. That God wants you to be obedient in the small things. And here's a quick example. When I was in college, I remember walking through campus and seeing like a big piece of garbage on the ground and walking right past it. And there's like my conscience was like, hey, you should pick that up. Like, it's not that big a deal. Like, pick it up. And I'm having this conversation as I'm walking away from the garbage. I'm like, yeah, but it's just a little piece of garbage, right? I mean, it's small. It's not that big a deal. And I felt like the farther away that I got, I'm like, this is going to bother me. If I don't go back and pick up this garbage, for some reason, like my conscience was just on me about this. And it felt like God was saying to me, if you can't be obedient on a really little thing, like picking up a piece of garbage, then why are you asking me for more and more responsibility? Greater things. Like, it starts with little stuff, right? Starts with the really, really little things. And so maybe your obedience is like staying off of Instagram in the evenings. Maybe your obedience is like, hey, I'm going to start my day with 5 minutes of scripture. I'm going to read a psalm. I'm going to read a chapter. I'm just going to start my day with something. So whatever it is, it's a small step of obedience toward Jesus. I encourage you to do that. Second, develop your love for Jesus. Building the habit of obedience typically does not happen through you just gritting it out and being more and more disciplined and trying harder and harder. Like, that's part of it. Being disciplined is part of it, for sure. But discipline will only get you so far. Like, you've got to develop a love for Jesus by spending time with him. And picture with me, if you've got a newborn, if you remember back to when you had a newborn, or you've seen a newborn, and the parents are holding that newborn, and they're just like looking at that child, smiling. You know what I'm talking about? Like, the baby's not doing anything. The baby's probably pooping, crying, whatever it is. But they're just like, in that moment, they're like, this is my child. And there's just a great amount of joy that a parent gets from looking at their child. What are they doing? They're adoring that child. And so you've got to get in a spot where you're not just doing things for Jesus, but you're actually spending time with him, looking at him, being reminded of how much he loves you, of what he's done for you, of where you would be should he remove his presence from your life, and then just enjoying that, adoring that, spending time being thankful, telling him how thankful you are for that. You've got to, if you're going to develop your love for Jesus, because you know you can't just do it with discipline, you've got to spend time adoring him. Third, invite accountability. Following Jesus is a team sport. And if we could just agree on that we wouldn't try to do this on our own, I think we would be so much better in this area of obedience. That when I'm struggling with something, or when I need help with something, that I would come to somebody who I know and who knows me, and I would say, hey, can you help me with this? Would you just shoot me a text on Monday mornings? Ask me if I've done this step of obedience. Would you just help me take this step of obedience? Because I don't feel like on my own I have the self-discipline to just do it. And if you don't have a friend like that, let me just encourage you to develop that. And I would say, if there's somebody here or somewhere else that you respect, if you were to humbly go with them and say, hey, I feel like I've looked up to you for a couple reasons. Would you help me with this thing? I could do better, and I feel like you could help me. I feel like most of us would respond pretty positively to that if someone came to us with that request. And I think it just takes some humility to go and ask somebody to invite a level of accountability or partnership in taking a step of obedience. And then lastly, go big. I know I said start small, but for some of you, God has been asking you to take a big step of obedience. And you've been like, I'll do this. And God's like, no, like a step, like a big step. And so if that's you, if there's something that God has been putting on your heart that's a little bit bigger, maybe it's a ministry that you need to serve in, maybe it's a neighbor that you need to go introduce yourself to, maybe it's a friend who doesn't know Jesus, but God's been nudging you to kind of open up that conversation. Maybe that's a big step for you this morning. And I would encourage you, like, when you take that big step and really lean and trust on the power of the Holy Spirit, that God will bless you for that your faith will be strengthened because you are stepping out of obedience, because it's coming from a spot of love, because you have spent time with Jesus. We've got to take some risks, some big risks for Jesus in all this. And my purpose this morning, just kind of as I wrap up, is not that you would doubt your salvation, but that you would do some serious self-reflection. And if you heard in this passage, and realize that maybe you've been doing things to try to earn your way into God's kingdom, or you've been doing things mostly so that you think God will have to bless you and give you the life that you want. The invitation is always to repent of those attitudes and then to, in faith, believe that God has forgiven you for that and that he is with you moving forward. That we would, in faith, ask Jesus to transform our hearts from selfish ones into loving ones that would be devoted to him. As we prayed, thy kingdom come, thy will, your will be done. Not my will, your will be done. And at the end of this, in verse 28, when Jesus had finished this just giant sermon, Matthew says, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. When people heard this idea, when they heard the difference between religion and Christianity, the way that Jesus was offering, that there's a different foundation to build your life upon than to just do good things trying to earn God's favor. It says they were astonished. It's a paradigm-shifting moment that led to a ton of freedom, that they could lift off that burden of trying to prove themselves in front of God, and they could live out of obedience because God has already accepted and loved them. It's a totally fundamentally different way of approaching faith. So that's the invitation this morning, that we would build a foundation that would endure. So let me pray for us this morning and we'll be dismissed. Father, forgive us for the times that we are obedient only for our own personal gain. Show us a glimpse of your beauty, that we can adore you, so that our obedience might flow from our love for you. And help us to build a foundation of truth that might withstand not only the storms that this life would bring us, but one that would give us confidence, one that's secure in you. I pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, one thing before you leave, there's a couple elders, and if you know who you are, if you don't know, we need a few elders at the back tables. I think they're going there now. We just announced today that last week's vote on Adam Glass was a positive, and we're super excited to welcome him next month sometime. Today, though, we are voting on Rich Finn, who was our youth pastor candidate. He was here last Sunday, spent the week before with us, and we're super excited to vote on him today. So if you're a member of New Hope, in the back two tables there is little paper ballots. If you would vote to affirm Rich as our next youth pastor, we also send an email. You can do that online, but that is for members, and encourage you to vote today on your way out, and excited to hopefully bring a couple staff people on this summer. Yeah? That'd be good. All right, hey, survive the heat. Have a great week. We'll see you.